Scott.
Our next presenter here, Scott Lindholm, Davenport, Iowa. Killed the winner.
Scott.
For better method. Family starting pitcher. Here we go.
One of the computer down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can do it, no problem.
Here we go, take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to present you today. Let me do one little quick thing here. All right. This all started about 4 years or so ago. I was just minding my own business on a Friday evening. And I saw this random tweet come by from somebody who I respect, and he was talking about Nolan Ryan's 1987 season. And he said, Nolan Ryan had a bad 1987 season? Well, shoot. You know, if you look at it by the numbers, well, he was 8-16. Well, that does sound like a pretty bad season if you think about it. Only 8 wins, 16 losses. But then he said, well, look at some of the other things. 2.76 ERA, he led the National League in ERA. 270 strikeouts, led the league. 142 ERA plus, a normalized figure, led the National League. 2.47 fielding independent pitching before people even knew what fielding independent pitching was, which led the National League. 6.5 hits per 9 innings pitched, which people also weren't paying much attention to in 1987, which also led the National League. And he even managed to get Cy Young votes, which I find quite miraculous. When you think about the typical Cy Young voter of 1987, I will guarantee most of them started, and ended with looking at an 8-16 record. No doubt those were probably the 2 Houston beat writers, because the way Cy Young voting works, it's 2 writers per city, so there would have been 24 writers total. You probably got votes from the 2 Houston writers. So, you ask yourself, was this a good season or a bad season? And that was my jumping off point. And I thought, there's got to be a better way than using a silly win-loss record to determine if a pitcher's had a good season. Now, before I show the next slide, I'm going to ask you to think for one moment. I want you to think about 2 things. Number 1, I want you to think in your mind, how long do you think it's been since pitchers completed at least 50% of the games that they started? So that means 50% of the starts were complete games. How long do you think that it's been since that happened? Number 2, how long do you think it's been since pitchers had complete games in even 25% of the games they started? So 25% of games were complete games. How long has it been? Longer than you think. Every now and then I have a chart that I'll put out on Twitter. More often than not, most of my Twitter followers are either lazy, drunk, or asleep, probably all 3. And so I have probably one of the least engaged Twitter audiences out there. But every now and then I will put a chart out there that makes people sit up and take attention. I put this out about 3 weeks or so ago. People sat up and paid attention. It has been since around 1920 since at least half of the games have been complete games. Back when men were men, they pitched complete games. By about 1920, that stopped. By about 1980, so it's been almost 40 years since even 25% of games have been complete games. There's a noted wag on Twitter. His name is Old Hoss Radburn. Obviously a parody account, given that Old Hoss died a long time ago and he's 162 years old today, if he was still with us. And so this is his thoughts on my particular graph that I put out. I can't really argue with them. He's got a pretty good point. For those of you that like to do these types of things, like Chris does, you will find Old Hoss's, he's buried in Bloomington, Illinois. So I'm going to throw a couple things out here real quick just to kind of lay my foundation. The percent of innings that starting pitchers are pitching since 1913. Back in the good old days, they pitched about 80% of total innings. Now it's down to about 63%. So they're pitching less, starting pitchers are pitching less than 2/3 of the innings these days. The number of pitchers that had at least 30+ starts and 20+ wins. They were very prevalent way back in the old days of baseball. We only had 1 or 2 pitchers on a pitching staff. Right now, the 20-win season is essentially extinct. You look at here, the percentage of games that are no decisions. So going back as far as 1913, which is where we can reliably start getting this data, about 16% of the games resulted in no decisions. Well, that means 84% of the games, you either had a win or a loss, you could at least come up with something. Now, almost 1/3 of games are no decision games. So as a result, a pitcher can go out there, do whatever he does, and walk out with absolutely nothing to show for it. Now granted, we have advanced measures that are supplanting things like the win. It's not as big of a deal as it used to be, but it still bugs me. And so I figured there's got to be a better way. There just has to be a better way. Now it's moving.
No. I can still see the graph.
Oh, the computer appears to be locked up.
Yeah. Big car.
Yeah, so we'll take a couple seconds here. This actually isn't bad break. I know. That's what I thought. I don't know.
So you're pretty familiar with this one, the disaster? I've read books and went to library, read microfilm, because that was early in the morning, so all the Saturday afternoon papers would have the story and different aspects about it. Unfortunately, the Tribune, which would have had an extra, I think they left it. It was the late paper. So I remember the Tribune used to print about 5 different editions. First one was I
was old school, you got Christmas before it's like, yeah,
the ones that were home delivered that the Quick Boys did. That's it, probably about
Oh, sorry about And so when you have that, you need to come up with some different ways of measuring pitcher effectiveness than using wins and losses. Back in the early 60s, Early Wynn won his 300th and final game. At the time, he fully believed that he was going to be the last of the 300-game winners. Even 50 years or so ago, Early Wynn thought that the ability to accumulate 300 wins was going to be impossible. Other than the 12 pitchers that followed him that did so after he did, he was pretty much correct. But for the most part, he has a valid point. He may not have been right in 1962, but he's certainly correct today. You look at baseball history right now. There are only 24 pitchers in baseball history with 300 wins. Well, he didn't win 300 wins. Well, guess what? There's been about 10,000 players that have pitched a game in baseball, so that means about 9,975 of them did not win 300 games. Only an additional 23 won between 250 and 299, and only an additional 79. This is a total of about 130 pitchers of baseball history that have won as many as 200 games. Think about that when you look at Mike Messina on that Hall of Fame ballot with the number of wins that he won. Think about that when you look at Curt Schilling. These are reasonably decent achievements. These are your career active leaders in wins. Bartolo, I don't know how Bartolo Colon occurred there. Bartolo Colon, 233 wins. He doesn't have much longer. I bet Bartolo can't pitch for more than 10 years at the most. So, actually Bartolo, the way he's pitching these days, he actually does have a chance of making it 300. CC Sabathia, falling apart as we watch. And now, look at this gap between number 2 and number 3. We lost a couple of people in between there. We lost Tim Hudson, and we lost Mark Burley. So the gap between number 2 and number 3 is almost 50 wins. And John Lackey and his magic teeth. And there is no way that John Lackey, he'll probably make it to 200, a little bit over 200, does not have a prayer of making it to 300. Justin Verlander, one of the outstanding pitchers of his generation, had a very good year. I'll demonstrate that in a little bit. Zach Greinke, Felix Hernandez, he actually does have a prayer because he's so young. Felix just turned 30. He just turned 30. That blows me away. Jake Peavy, see him. Jared Weaver. Look at this. 8 pitchers on here. 8 current pitchers with 150 or more wins. Well, he didn't win 300 wins. Well, guess what? No one else probably ever will again unless something drastic changes. So what are we going to do? We need a new way to measure these things. And so what I've done, I don't invent things. I research things. I find interesting things and I look for answers because I'm not a very original person. And so the answer is actually sitting right out there in front of us and has been for at least 20 years, maybe even longer, and that's what Bill James invented the game score. And so all we do, we use our Bill James game scores, which I'll describe in a moment. We give a point for a starting pitcher that has a game score of 50 or more, and we rate every single start. So there's 2 basic methods out there. You have the Bill James method, and you have Tom Tango, who now works for MLB Advanced Media. He tried his way of updating the game score. And what you're going to see is they're really not that different. They have a constant. Bill James uses 50, Tango uses 40. They give points for how many outs are recorded. James gives bonus points for innings pitched after the 4th. Tango just goes straight with outs. They give points for strikeouts. They take away points for hits. Tango takes away points for home runs in this environment. Last year was the highest home run rate in history. Bill James differentiates between earned runs and unearned runs. Tango does not. I asked Baseball Reference to start adding unearned runs into their leaderboard columns, and so much to my chagrin they did. So now I got to take them out every time I do that stuff. And then they also subtract walks. These are not esoteric measures. These are not weird analytics. These are very common things every single one of us in this room have known and understood since we were 7, 8 years old. So all we're basically doing is we are looking at what a pitcher can control. Can a pitcher throw strikeouts? Can he keep the hits down? Can he keep the ball in the park, etc., along the lines like that? We are evaluating a pitcher on what a pitcher can do and much less on what his offense can do behind him. I chose 50. I'm just showing a couple real quick. You can see how bell-shaped this curve is. You find the midpoint actually is probably somewhere around 51 to 52%. For Tango, the distribution is the same. I chose 1990 to 2016. If I even took it all the way back to 1913, the distribution would still be roughly the same. So 50 seems like a reasonable number that I can start with. Wake back up, start listening again. So, we have Jake Arrieta, just to show you how some of these different game score methods can actually view somebody. So you've got Arrieta on 8/18/2016. He had an okay game, pitched 5 2/3 innings, 3 strikeouts, gave up 3 hits, a couple of home runs, which are not good, quite a few earned runs, quite a few walks for Jake Arrieta. So basically, he had a 39 by Bill James. Tango gives more of a negative for the home runs, so he had a 30 by Tom Tango. This was not a good start for Jake Arrieta. He would not get credit for what I'll call a win, for lack of a better term. When you compare the two methods, James on this axis, Tango on this, you'll see they may differ in number, but generally speaking, they're telling the same story. You're not going to find a Bill James game score here that has a Tango game score over here. They're both working along the same thing. Tango will tell you that all he did was look at Bill James' method and see if he could tweak it. And he tweaked it 5 different times until he found one that he was satisfied with. And that's this method right here that he chose to use. So, get out those reading glasses, ladies and gentlemen. What happens when I go from 1950, and I go with a minimum of 300 starts for pitchers, and I'm going to do this by percentage of games in which they had a game score of 50 or greater. So you see numero uno is Pedro Martinez. Over 75% of his games were games that were considered to be positive outcomes, at least by my methodology. Pedro Martinez had me nervous in the 2015 Hall of Fame voting. I did not know how voters were going to look at his win-loss record. I was very afraid they were going to say, oh, he only won 229 games, or whatever the case was. They looked at him very favorably. He got about 91% of the vote. People are starting to recognize the win, 208 right here. These are the wins and losses I show here. These are only for starts. This probably won't necessarily match up to career because he might have had some wins in relief. Probably not many. But what you'll see, of his 400 starts, over 300 of them were effective starts. And you can see how much better it was. These last 2 columns, CW is a cheap win. That's where Pedro's teammates go out and score 10 runs, and Pedro holds the opponent team down to only 8. Well, he gets a win anyway. TL is a tough loss. That's where Pedro Martinez gives up 1 run, and his team scores 0. And he gets a loss, and that ain't right. He did nothing wrong. It's not his fault. His team provided no offense behind him. Looking at some of the people behind him, one way to tell, is this a good measure? Well, this would be a curious measure if the person on top of this was somebody like, say, Kevin Brown, or just some pitcher that we know wasn't very good. Pedro Martinez, who's right behind him? Tom Seaver, pretty good. Bob Gibson, Kurt Schilling, pretty good. Roger Clemens, pretty good. Sandy Koufax, he's pretty good. Nolan Ryan, Cole Hamels. Look, it's a modern pitcher. A modern pitcher who to this day only has about 130 wins. What are you going to do with that guy when he peters out at about 180 and 190 wins, and you're using an outdated metric in order to evaluate him? You can tell the Hall of Famers are the ones in red. So you can see you've got some interesting people. people. Sid Fernandez, he's here because he barely meets this threshold. You got David Cohn, Justin Verlander, Whitey Ford. You are the company you keep. Felix Hernandez, Burt Blyleven, probably one of the most overlooked pitchers of recent memory because he had the unfortune to play for really bad teams. He had the unfortune to play for teams that were not nice enough to get behind him. Let's narrow this down a little bit more. Let's just take this down to 100 starts since 1950. This way we get some of the newer guys in and we can see who's having effective careers. Clayton Kershaw. Call me crazy, he's pretty good. Steven Strasburg, pretty good. Chris Sale, pretty gone. So you look at Chris Sale. As far as I can tell, only one person, and he happens to reside in a broadcast booth, didn't think Chris Sale was getting the recognition he deserved. All of baseball is aware of how good of a pitcher Chris Sale is. All this does is it shows you how well he started off his career. He obviously hasn't reached his decline phase. What's he going to do with the real offense behind him in Boston? I shudder to think. I think he's going to take off. You start looking at some of the modern pitchers here. Madison Bumgarner, David Price, Johan Santana. Mark Pryor sneaks in here. What could have been if that guy hadn't gotten injured? Adam Wainwright, Hugh Darvish. So you start seeing what this does, it helps us tease out who some of the young up-and-comers could be as they continue to develop. Are they there yet? No, but they could be. Yeah. Think longer. Lester was just off that page. I mean, he would have been, if I scrolled down next, he would have been on the next page. Of these pitchers, minimum 300 starts. There's 205 pitchers in that list since 1950. This is not the bottom of the group, but this is close to the bottom part. There's probably enough pitchers that go down to about here. But I needed to get this guy. Paul Splittor, pretty end. Mike Hampton, pretty end. Tim Wakefield, pretty knuckleball. Mike Flanagan, not bad. Steve Traxel, pretty slow. So,
Very slow.
who is the guy that I'm missing right here? I wonder who this person is. Well, I'll give you a hint. You'll be able to vote for the Hall of Fame in 2018. His name is Jamie Moyer. So, Jamie Moyer, by this analysis, 335 effective starts. Pretty good. And 303 non-effective starts. Pretty bad. As a matter of fact, I believe the highest number of these 205 people here. If the Hall of Fame wants to start electing fifth starters into the Hall of Fame, here's your man. He's right there. Now granted, this analysis may not love pitchers like Jamie Moyer, Wakefield, Mark Burley, non-power pitchers, but for the most part, you don't need to be a strikeout pitcher to be able to get a 50-plus game score. Think of Greg Maddox's favorite game, 27 ground outs. So there you've got, no strikeouts, they're all ground outs. He's going to have a game score in the 70s, somewhere in the high 70s, so he would certainly make it in this particular analysis. So Jamie Moyer is going to get quite a bit of Hall of Fame support next year. You can hear it. And I'm going to love, there's one thing I've been doing for the last 3 years, me and a handful of other people. There's a gentleman by the name of Ryan Thibodeau that is making public all the Hall of Fame ballots that have been announced out there. And so I go through that, and what I also do is I look to see for people that vote for Barry Bonds but don't vote for Roger Clemens or vice versa. That number, really small. I'm going to be looking for people next year that vote for Jamie Moyer and don't vote for Mike Mussina, because I'm going to be really, really confused by that. Because this is the bottom of this list. Mike Mussina, we did not see in the prior list. He would have been just off that second page. He's just as effective as anybody else. Let's look at last year. Let's look at the AL. Let's pretend we were doing this for a Cy Young standpoint. Some of you may remember, near the end of the season, you started hearing rumblings. Justin Verlander could maybe be, the AL Cy Young winner. How is that possible? He only had a 16-9 record. Well, if you look at how effective he he was. In his 34 starts, 30 of them had game scores of 50 or higher. He got things done. He did what he was supposed to do. It wasn't his fault that the Tigers didn't hit behind him. You can see, he got no cheap wins. So of those 16, he didn't get any of those in 10 to 8 pitch fests. And he had 5 cheap losses. J.A. not bad. 20-4 record. Rick Porcello, 22-4. Not bad. One of the best known secrets in baseball, Jose Quintana. Oh, nobody gives Quintana any credit. They say he's not any good. Well, other than all of baseball is aware of how good of a pitcher Jose Quintana has been for the last 5 years. And by this analysis, the 3rd best pitcher in the American League last year, even better than Chris Sale, even better than Miguel Gonzalez. Oh, wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Did I just see the White Sox had 3 of the best top 9 pitchers in the AL last year? Why, it appears that's the case. That doesn't even include Carlos Rodon. Shows you how far good pitching will take you 1. So if you don't have hitting, you're not really going to get that far. So this is the AL. The NL. Who can you give the Cy Young Award to pretty much every year for the past 5 years? His name is Clayton Kershaw, and he's pretty good. So, Clayton Kershaw, he was hurt. He only made 20 starts last year. And, so I can understand that. You look at an 11-4 record, and you're like, oh, But of those 20 starts, 18 were effective. I'll take them. John Lester, Kyle Hendricks, I thought they had a very reasonable shot of being one of the first sets of pitchers to finish 1-2 in the Cy Young race. That didn't turn out. But you can see, Kyle Hendricks, even though he's a perceived soft tosser, he still was very effective in 25 of his 30 starts. John Lackey, very effective in 22 of his 29 starts. So here, now you've got 3 of the top 7, you get 103 wins. The other one, well, you got a lot less than 103 wins. Sometimes wins still do matter. In 2014, Clayton Kershaw did something very interesting. He had 27 starts that year, and he won 21 games. I thought, that seems kind of unusual. That sure doesn't seem like very many starts to win 20 games. Well, I guess it is unusual when only 2 other people in baseball history have won as many as 20 games while making 27 or fewer starts in the season. So Clayton Kershaw, as opposed to pitching in 1902 in a pitcher's era, in 1880 against who knows what kind of competition, Clayton Kershaw against the best competition. Sometimes the wins still do matter. Max Scherzer in 2013, same thing. Let's take a final look at 1987. Nolan Ryan, using this analysis, I wonder how Nolan Ryan looks. I think you already know the answer, but go ahead and use me anyway. So we're going down from up. This is all of the major leagues, not just the American League. Frank Loyola had an actual record of 17-10. By my analysis, 25 of his 36 starts were decent starts, not too shabby. Mike Dunn, the Pirates. Mike Scott, the Astros. A very mundane, slightly above average record turns into something very positive. The Astros in 1987 dropped about 20 games over the 86 Astros. That's what injuries will do to you. Dwight Gooden. Jack Morris. A good record turns into something pretty stellar. Jimmy Key, one of the more overlooked pitchers, probably Key and David Cohn of the past 30 or 40 years. Somebody who's very good, very effective, and you just don't hear his name mentioned that much. Goes from a pretty good record to a pretty stunning record. Well, hey, look at that. You look at Nolan Ryan, 8-16. What kind of year was that? Well, when over 80% of his starts were effective starts, he can go ahead and look at all those people, and he can pretend that the rest of his Houston Astros teammates in 1987 were Robin Ventura, and he can go ahead and pound on them because they didn't support him. So what happened? Did Nolan Ryan have a very... I wanted to show that video clip so bad. I wanted to give it so I could have Ryan doing the punch for about 30 seconds straight. It would have been hilarious, but he just wastes Robin Ventura. Nolan Ryan, 1987, pretty darn good. It's just that by using an archaic measure, completely hidden, completely buried. There's a better way out there. Sean Foreman, Baseball Reference. You already keep track of the game scores. Put up a leaderboard. Dave Cameron, you're using Tango's game scores in your game logs. Go ahead and put up a leaderboard. Tom Tango, you work at MLB Advanced Media. All you gotta do is pick up the phone and say, hey, make a leaderboard using my game scores. You're already showing them in your box scores anyway. The game scores are becoming more prevalent out there. They can become a counting stat in and of themselves. And with that, I just want to make one concluding statement and thank you for your attention. We've had 4 different presentations today. We had a very extreme advanced analytics. We've had a couple of very good historical presentations, and one like mine where we just looked at some old numbers and looked at it anew again. On SABR Day, this shows just how wide and varied the Society for American Baseball Researchers truly is. From the number crunchers, the historians, to the people who like biographies, to the pictures, to the uniforms. It's all baseball. All of us are all trying to do one thing and one thing only. We're trying to tell a story. We're trying to tell a story about baseball in a way that resonates with us. So with that, thank you for your attention. Have a great day.